It feels like every day there's a whole new wave of cybersecurity news crashing over us.
It can be a lot to keep up with.
Right. So today we're going to do a deep dive into the stuff you actually need to know today.
That's right, cutting through the noise and getting down to the essential updates.
Exactly. So we've been combing through all the headlines, security vendor reports, government advisories, you name it.
All to bring our listeners the most critical insights.
Yeah, so you can stay informed and maybe save yourself some time too.
And hopefully protect yourself and your organization better, too.
Absolutely. All right, so let's jump right in, starting with the big news of the day, a cyber attack that's basically crippled a major flight ticket wholesaler called Air Ticket.
Crippled. Wow.
Yeah, their IT department discovered this breach on Friday, March 14th.
And Friday the 14th, huh? Not a good day for them, I guess.
You know, it sounds like they're having to completely rebuild their
Oh,
system.
that's a huge undertaking, a complete rebuild.
It is, and think about the impact this has. Like, all these travel agencies rely on Air Ticket to book flights for their customers.
All right, it's a major disruption to the travel industry as a whole.
Totally. And then on the same day, actually,
On the same day.
the municipal administration in Kirkle
Wow.
was also hit by a cyber attack.
So governments are being targeted, too?
They're not immune. No, they had to shut down operations. About 100 devices need to be reconfigured.
100 devices. That's pretty extensive.
Yep.
So what's causing all this? Is it ransomware again?
Well, that's what they're suspecting in both cases, both
Yeah.
Air Ticket and Kirkle.
Ransomware, it never seems to go away.
It doesn't. It's a persistent threat, and it shows that no one is really off limits.
From small towns to global companies, everyone's a potential target.
Right now, Air Ticket, they're trying to get a temporary booking platform up and running. They're calling it Cockpit Lite.
Cockpit Lite, interesting name.
Yeah, it's just a stopgap measure, so their agents can at least do something. But this isn't their first rodeo with cyber incidents.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had a data breach back in 2016.
So they've been targeted before.
They have, which, could make them a more appealing target for these attackers.
Yeah. Sadly, organizations that have been breached in the past often become repeat victims.
Makes sense. I guess they think lightning might strike twice.
Right, or that they might be more willing to pay a ransom if they've done it before.
Yeah, so in Kirkle, they've got some outside experts helping out from the Central Contact Point Cybercrime,
Cybercrime experts.
which is part of the Sutherland State Criminal Police Office. So
Wow, so they're bringing in the big guns.
pretty serious stuff, yeah. But they still don't know how the attackers got in.
It's always a big mystery, isn't it?
It is, but they do know that malware was used.
Malware, of course.
It just shows how sophisticated these attacks are becoming.
It does, and how important it is to have those incident response plans in place.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to something that I think is really important. The FBI and CISA, they've issued a joint advisory about a ransomware group called Medusa.
Medusa?
Yeah, have you heard of them?
I have. They're a pretty notorious group.
Yeah, and when these agencies put out an alert like this, it means they're a serious threat.
Definitely. They're a clear and present danger to organizations.
So this Medusa group, they've got some interesting tactics. They recruit something called initial access brokers.
Initial access brokers, what's that?
Think of them as like hackers for hire.
Hackers for hire, wow.
Yeah, their whole job is to get that initial foothold into a target's network.
So they were like the first stage of the attack.
Exactly. And Medusa pays them really well, like anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million for access.
$1 million. That's crazy.
It is, and they even offer exclusive partnerships with these brokers.
It's a big business.
It is a big business. Unfortunately, one of the main ways they get those credentials is through phishing.
Phishing, of course.
It's still so effective?
It is, because it preys on human error.
That's right. And Medusa also exploits unpatched vulnerabilities.
Just like most ransomware groups.
Exactly. They're specifically targeting CVE 2024-1709.
That's a vulnerability in Screen Connect, right?
Yeah, and CVE 2023-48788, which is a SQL injection flaw in Fortinet EMS.
So if you haven't patched those systems, you're basically a sitting duck.
You are. This is why patching is so important.
Absolutely. It's basic cyber hygiene.
Okay, so once they're in the network, they use these legitimate tools that are already there for reconnaissance. Things like Advanced IP Scanner and SoftPerfect Network Scanner.
So they're living off the land.
Exactly. They're using the tools that are already present to avoid detection.
Very sneaky.
And they stand for open ports like FTP, SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, SQL databases, RDP.
All the usual suspects.
Right. And then for moving around the network laterally, they heavily rely on PowerShell and CMD.exe.
The command prompt, really.
Yeah, they use it for more reconnaissance and to transfer their own malicious tools.
Ingress tool transfer, they call it.
Right, and they're always trying to cover their tracks, deleting PowerShell command history using searchatil for file transfers.
So they're trying to stay under the radar.
They are, and they're also using legitimate remote access tools for lateral movement, things like AnyDesk, Atera, ConnectWise, RDP.
So they're adaptable. They use whatever tools they need.
Exactly, blending in with the environment.
Makes it harder to detect them.
It does. Now, the good news is the FBI and CISA, they emphasized that basic cybersecurity practices are your best defense against these guys.
The basics are still the most important.
They are things like patching, training your employees to recognize phishing, implementing zero trust, and network segmentation, having those ransomware-resistant backups.
It all comes back to the fundamentals.
It does. All right, let's talk about something else that's pretty concerning. The timelines for malware attacks, they're getting shorter.
Shorter how so?
Well, you know how we talk about dwell time.
The time malware stays undetected on a system.
Right, and then there's time to exploit, or TTE, which is how long it takes for attackers to start exploiting a vulnerability after it's been disclosed.
Right, so how are those timelines changing?
They're shrinking dramatically. Google's Mandiant Group found that the average TTE dropped from 63 days in 2018 to just 5 days in 2023.
5 days, that's incredibly fast.
It shows how quickly these attackers are moving.
It's scary how efficient they've become.
And it gets worse. The Huntress Cyber Report found that time to ransom, or TTR for some ransomware groups, is down to just a few hours.
A few hours. That's not much time to react.
It isn't. Their overall average TTE for all the ransomware incidents they looked at was around 17 hours.
So from initial intrusion to ransomware deployment in less than a day,
That's right.
that's a huge challenge for defenders.
It is. And then Palo Alto Networks, they reported that a quarter of data thefts now happen in less than 5 hours from that initial malware entry.
Wow, that's 3 times faster than what they saw in 2021.
Exactly. And they think it's only going to get worse with the use of artificial intelligence.
AI is going to make things even faster.
That's their prediction. They said it could potentially reduce these times to minutes.
Minutes, that's almost unimaginable.
I know it's a game changer. Oh, dwell times are also shrinking. SecureWorks found that some ransomware groups are down to as little as 7 hours.
7 hours, that's barely any time to detect and respond.
It isn't. And a tenth of all the intrusions they studied happened within 5 hours of the initial access.
So basically, as soon as they're in, they're launching their attack.
Pretty much. Yeah. And then CrowdStrike, they looked at breakout time, which is the time it takes for an attacker to move laterally within a network after they've compromised a system.
So how quickly they can spread throughout the network.
Right. And they found an all-time low average of just 48 minutes.
48 minutes, that's alarmingly fast.
It is. The fastest they observed was 51 seconds.
51 seconds, that's practically instantaneous.
It is. It's mind-boggling.
It really shows how sophisticated these attackers are.
They even gave an example of a group called Curly Spider, who took less than 4 minutes from the initial phishing email to establishing a backdoor.
4 minutes, that's not even enough time to make a cup of coffee.
It isn't. It means that traditional security approaches just aren't cutting it anymore.
We need to be much more proactive and much faster in our response.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some specific vulnerabilities that have been making headlines. Zimbra Collaboration Suite, it's got 3 critical security flaws.
Zimbra, a lot of organizations use that.
They do. So if you're one of them, you need to pay attention.
Critical flaws, that sounds serious.
They're tracked as CVE 2025-27915, CVE 2025-25064, and CVE 2025-25065.
So what kind of vulnerabilities are we talking about?
The first one is a stored cross-site scripting vulnerability, or XSS.
XSS, that's a common one.
It's in the classic web client. The problem is that HTML content embedded in ICS calendar invite files wasn't being properly sanitized.
So attackers could inject malicious JavaScript code into those files.
Exactly. And when a user opens an email with that attachment, the script executes.
That's nasty.
It could allow attackers to do things like set up unauthorized email forwarding, steal credentials, even manipulate email filters.
So they can spy on your email communications.
Right. The second one is a SQL injection vulnerability, or SQL.
These are classic.
It's in the ZimberSync service SOAP endpoint. Basically, it means attackers can inject malicious SQL commands into database queries.
And potentially steal sensitive data from the database.
Exactly. Things like email records, even access to the underlying system.
That's a huge risk.
It is. And then the third one is a server-side request forgery vulnerability, or SSRF.
SSRF, I've heard of that one.
It's in the RSS feed. Parser attackers can manipulate the URLs of RSS feeds to trick the server into making unauthorized requests.
So they can access internal systems that shouldn't be exposed to the internet.
Right, it's like a backdoor into the network.
Very dangerous.
It is now the good news is there are patches available for all three of these vulnerabilities.
The Zimbra users need to patch their systems immediately.
Absolutely. And this is just a good reminder to follow those general security best practices.
Like what?
Things like regular updates, log monitoring, strong authentication, least privilege, using a WAF security awareness training backups.
All the things we talk about all the time.
It's worth repeating, though, because clearly not everyone is doing it.
True enough.
All right, moving on. Cyble, the cybersecurity firm, they've highlighted some more actively exploited high-risk vulnerabilities.
Oh, so these are ones that are already being used in attacks.
Exactly. One of them is CVE 2025-24201.
What's that one affect?
It's a vulnerability in Apple's WebKit browser engine.
WebKit is pretty widely used.
It is. It's an out-of-bounds write issue.
So attackers can write data outside of an allocated memory buffer.
Right, and potentially execute arbitrary code.
That's bad news.
It is, but the good news is there are patches available.
So Apple users need to update their devices, ASAP.
Yeah, make sure you're running the latest version.
All right, what's the other one?
It's CVE 2024-4577, a remote code execution flaw in PHP when it's running in CGI mode on Windows servers.
PHP, that's another popular one.
It is, and Cyble says they've seen consistent attacks targeting this vulnerability since it was first disclosed.
So it's been actively exploited for a while.
It has, and they've seen a big increase in mass exploitation attempts since January 2025.
Yikes. So it's getting worse.
It seems so, yeah. And what makes this one tricky is that it can be exploited even if PHP isn't explicitly configured to run in CGI mode.
How is that possible?
Because the PHP CGI module is embedded in some popular web server packages like ICE and AngisMPP.
Oh, so it's kind of hidden.
It is, which makes it harder to detect and fix.
Definitely something for system administrators to be aware of.
Okay, now let's talk about a vulnerability in Apache Tomcat CVE 2025-24813.
Apache Tomcat, another widely used piece of software.
Yep, this one's a remote code execution vulnerability, and a proof of concept exploit was released publicly.
So attackers had all the information they needed to exploit it.
They did, and within 30 hours, it was being actively exploited.
30 hours, that's incredibly fast.
It shows how quickly attackers can move when a public exploit is available.
It's a race against time.
It is. And to make matters worse, the first attack they saw was on March 12th from Poland.
Before the public exploit was even released.
That's right, which suggests that some attackers may have known about this vulnerability before it was publicly disclosed.
That's pretty scary.
It is. It means they had a head start.
We're always playing catch-up, it seems.
It can feel that way. Yeah. The affected versions of Tomcat are 9.0.0 M1 up to 11.0.2, but they've released fixed versions now.
So if you're running Tomcat, you need to update immediately.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about software supply chain vulnerabilities for a bit.
Supply chain attacks, those are becoming a major concern.
They are Reversing Labs. They just put out a report on this, and they found a 12% increase in exposed development secrets in open source packages.
Exposed secrets, like what?
Things like API keys, passwords that were accidentally left in the code.
Oh, wow. So attackers can just grab those and use them.
They can, and they analyzed popular open source packages and found an average of 6 critical and 33 high-severity security flaws per package.
That's a lot of vulnerabilities.
It is, and they also found instances of actively exploited vulnerabilities and the problem of code rot.
Code rot.
Yeah, when packages rely on outdated dependencies that might have known security weaknesses.
Oh, so it's not just new vulnerabilities, it's old ones too.
Exactly. And then Reversing Labs also talked about how AI is being used in supply chain attacks.
AI for attacks.
Yep. They mentioned a technique called Nullif AI that was used against the Hugging Face platform.
Hugging Face, isn't that for AI models and data sets?
So attackers are going after the tools that are used to develop AI.
That's a whole new level of sophistication.
It is, and it means that the AI systems we're all relying on could be compromised from the start.
That's a sobering thought.
It is Reversing Labs, and other experts are really pushing for the use of software bill of materials, or SBOMs.
SBOMs, what are those?
It's basically a list of ingredients for your software. It tells you all the components that make it up.
So you know exactly what you're dealing with.
Exactly. And they're also recommending using software composition analysis, or SCA.
SCA, what does that do?
It helps you identify and analyze the open source and third-party components in your software so you can find vulnerabilities.
So it's like a security checkup for your code.
It is. All right, so we've covered a lot today. Ransomware attacks, shrinking attack timelines, critical vulnerabilities, software supply chain risks. It's a lot to take in.
The threat landscape is constantly evolving.
It is, and it's more important than ever to stay informed and proactive.
We need to be constantly alerting and adapting.
Absolutely. All right, so that brings us to the end of our deep dive into today's cybersecurity news. Hopefully you found it informative and maybe a little bit scary.
It's important to be aware of the threats, but not paralyzed by them.
That's right. We can't let fear stop us from doing what we need to do to protect ourselves.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
It is so. Stay vigilant out there, everyone, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for joining me.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
Stay safe, everyone.
You too.